She hadn't spoken a word in months, trapped in her own silent world of fear, until a black and tan puppy burst into her life and changed everything. This is the story of how a retired soldier and 2 German shepherds gave a mute alien girl her voice back, and in doing so, forged a family against the backdrop of interstellar conflict. Jake Mercer returned from the war zones with ghosts that wore his own face. The silence in his small station apartment screamed louder than any battlefield. His hands remembered the weight of a rifle better than they knew how to hold a coffee mug without trembling. Clean white walls held nothing but the echo of footsteps that always walked alone. His therapy notes sat on the metal table, filled with words that felt like someone else's language. Responsibility and connection. He wrote them every morning like a prayer he'd forgotten how to mean. The letters looked back at him, empty and sharp. Sometimes he'd trace them with a finger and wonder when he'd stopped believing in anything but survival. Then Cooper called. Just a voice on the comm, familiar and uncomplicated. A request about 2 pups at the military decommissioning center. Genetic surplus, scheduled for termination. Jake almost said no, almost let the words form and end it, but he went. The center smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. The German shepherds watched him through the bars, their eyes too knowing for creatures so young. 1 black and tan, 1 solid black. Their tags read Scout and Shadow. They pressed against the cage doors, tails making soft thumps against metal. He saw it then, that same hollow look he carried in his own reflection. The desperate need to be worth saving. His hand reached for the release mechanism before his mind could protest. They destroyed his apartment within hours. Chewed the legs off his table, tore stuffing from the 1 chair he ever sat in. Their claws scraped lines in the polymer floor that he knew would never buff out. But their chaos filled the silence with something that wasn't memories. Scout would sleep with his head on Jake's boot, breath warm through the leather. Shadow watched the door like she expected enemies at any moment. They understood vigil. They understood waiting for the other shoe to drop. Slowly, the routine changed. Morning walks through the station's agricultural sector instead of staring at the walls. Other residents began recognizing the trio, the grim man with the 2 beautiful dogs. They'd stop to ask about the shepherds, about their training, about anything at all. Jake found himself having conversations at the hydration station. Brief, awkward exchanges that somehow didn't feel like burdens. The dogs became his ambassadors to a world he'd stopped trying to join. At night, he'd watch them sleep tangled together, a single breathing entity of trust and protection. Their total faith in him became a weight he didn't mind carrying. For the first time since leaving the service, his hands felt like they could hold something without breaking it. The call from the orphanage wing came 2 weeks later. A caretaker asking if he'd socialize the dogs with the children. Another request. Another open door. He looked at Scout, who tilted his head as if waiting for orders. Jake Mercer said yes. The Lyrian ward of Aunt Terry's station moved with the soft colors and gentle light of her people's design. In the corner where the observation window met the bulkhead, a small blue-skinned girl sat perfectly still. Her name was Anara, and she hadn't spoken in 5 months. Not since the incident. Not since her parents stopped coming home. Caretaker Nia Torin noted the date on her datapad, the numbers marking another week of silence. Her empathic senses brushed against the child's emotional field like fingers testing frozen glass. She recorded the observations with clinical precision. Subject maintains defensive posture. Responds to direct engagement with physical withdrawal. Vocal cords show no physiological impairment. Anara watched the other children through the observation window. Their games of gravity ball in the recreation sphere sent colored orbs bouncing in slow arcs. She could see their mouths moving, their laughter silent behind the thick transparisteel. Her own memories played on a different screen behind her eyes. The flash of weapons fire, her mother's hand going slack, the smell of ozone and something metallic she couldn't name. The station's constant hum became her anchor. That deep vibration through the deck plates, the whisper of life support cycling air through the vents. It never changed. It never lied. It never promised safety and then broke that promise. She'd press her cheek against the cool bulkhead and feel the vibration travel through her bones, a steadiness her world otherwise lacked. Naya approached with the afternoon nutrient tray. She set it on the low table beside Anara's curled form. The girl's violet eyes tracked the movement but showed no recognition of the food. Nia didn't push. She'd learned that pressure only made the child retreat further into her protective silence. Their daily rhythm had become a careful dance. Nia would offer food, a blanket, a datapad with interactive stories. Anara would accept or decline with microscopic movements, a slight shake of her head, a finger tracing patterns on her knee. The caregivers had stopped trying to make her speak months ago. Now they simply ensured she ate enough, slept enough, continued breathing. What they didn't see were the nightmares. The way Anara's hands would clutch at her sleeping mat in the artificial night cycle, the silent screams that made her throat ache with the effort of containing them. She remembered things no child should witness, details that would have made station security escalate her protection level immediately. The official report called it a shuttle accident, an energy conduit failure during atmospheric entry. But Anara had seen the other ship, seen the way it detached from theirs after the boarding, seen the figures in mercenary armor moving through the smoke. She kept these memories locked behind her teeth. Words were dangerous. Words could be overheard. Words had gotten her parents killed. Nia felt the weight of the child's fear like a physical presence in the room. Her Lyrian empathy allowed her to sense the sharp edges of trauma, without understanding its specific shape. She documented the patterns, how Anara flinched at sudden hydraulic sounds, how her breathing changed when certain uniformed personnel passed through the ward. The caretaker's reports piled up in the station's administrative system. Routine assessments of a traumatized orphan. No flags, no special attention. Just another casualty of interstellar politics fading quietly into the system. What none of them realized was that the people who killed her parents knew she'd witnessed everything. Knew she could identify their ship's markings, their armor insignia, the specific mods on their plasma rifles. Her silence wasn't a symptom, it was a shield. A fragile one. The transfer paperwork that arrived that morning seemed routine. A request to move the child to a specialized facility on Proxima Station. Better resources for trauma cases. Standard procedure. Nia almost approved it without a second thought. Almost. Jake led the dogs through the station's main concourse on their training leads. The pup's claws clicked rhythmically against the polished deck plates, their ears swiveling at every new sound. He kept their pace deliberate, his grip firm on the leashes. This was their third socialization outing, and he'd started noticing patterns. Scout reacted to children's voices with immediate interest, while Shadow monitored security personnel and exit routes. The orphanage wing glowed with soft amber lighting that felt intentional. Designed to soothe, Jake nodded to the caregiver at the reception desk, a Lyrian woman who motioned him toward the common area. A dozen children of various species looked up from their activities. Some smiled. Some watched with careful neutrality. He unclipped the leashes, giving the hand signal for free exploration. Shadow immediately began a perimeter check, nose working along the baseboards. Scout stood motionless for 3 seconds, then his whole body went alert. His head turned toward the observation nook where the bulkhead curved into a window seat. Anara had been watching the other children play gravity ball through the transparisteel. She'd drawn her knees to her chest, making herself small against the cushion. When Scout moved, she went still in that particular way prey animals freeze. Her violet eyes widened, fingers tightening around the fabric of her pants. The German shepherd covered the distance in 6 bounding strides. His tail moved in wide, sweeping arcs that disrupted the calm air of the room. Jake started forward, a command forming on his lips, but something made him pause. The girl hadn't screamed, hadn't run. Scout stopped exactly 2 feet from her curled form. His entire posture changed from momentum to invitation. He dropped into a perfect playbow, front legs extended, rear end in the air. The whine that escaped his throat was high and hopeful. Anara's breath caught. She looked from the dog to Jake across the room, then back to the animal. Her hands unclenched slowly. Scout inched forward, nose twitching. He nudged her closed fist with his muzzle, then licked the space between her knuckles. The sound surprised them both. A choked little gasp that turned into something else entirely. Laughter. Quiet at first, then brighter as Scout's tail wagged harder. He pressed his head against her chest, demanding scratches behind his ears. Her blue fingers sank into his fur, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Jake watched the girl's shoulders relax. The tension that had held her rigid for months seemed to drain away under the dog's persistent affection. Scout leaned against her, a warm, breathing weight that anchored her to the present moment. Across the room, Shadow completed her circuit and came to sit at Jake's side. Her dark eyes tracked the interaction, ears forward. The tactical part of Jake's mind noted how perfectly the dog had positioned herself between the girl and the room's entrance, how her body blocked two approach angles simultaneously. Nia appeared in the doorway, her datapad forgotten in her hand. She watched Anara scratching Scout's ears, the girl's mouth moving as she whispered something to the dog. The caretaker's empathic senses registered the shift immediately, the brittle fear replaced by something softer, more pliable. Scout rolled onto his back, presenting his belly for rubbing. Anara's laughter came again, clearer this time. The sound drew looks from other children, who seemed to realize they were witnessing something unusual. Something important. Jake felt the leash in his hand become unnecessary. The connection had already been made, the protocol established. These two creatures from different worlds had found a common language that required no translation. Shadow leaned against his leg, her quiet presence confirming what he already knew. The mission parameters had just changed entirely. Jake moved toward them slowly, each step measured. The girl's eyes locked onto him, and for a moment they were the same. Two creatures braced for impact. Her small blue hand rested on Scout's back, fingers buried in the dark fur. The dog leaned into her touch, his body vibrating with the happy tremors of a tail wag. But her own subtle shaking came from a different place entirely. His training said, "Create distance, assess from safety." But the sound of her laughter still hung in the air between them, a fragile thing he didn't want to break. He lowered himself to one knee, keeping his posture open, non-threatening. The deck plating felt cool through his pants. Scout thumped his tail against the floor, looking from the girl to Jake as if connecting them with his gaze. Jake's right hand went to his thigh pocket, fingers searching past the ration bars and spare energy cells. The crinkle of foil whispered in the quiet space. He brought out the small silver packet torn at one corner. Inside were the sour, sweet candies he'd carried since his last deployment. Tangy citrus dusted with sugar crystals that crackled on the tongue. Comfort food for stressful moments? He shook one into his palm. The candy sat there like a tiny orange moon against the landscape of his scars. Knuckle ridges from close quarters training. A pale line across the heel of his hand from shattered transparasteel. His hand didn't look like something that should offer comfort. "Here," he said, voice lower than he intended. "I promise it's good." Anara's eyes flicked from the candy to his face to Scout's trusting posture. The dog nudged her arm with his nose, a silent endorsement. Her blue fingers uncurled slowly. She reached out, the movement hesitant as if testing the air between them. Her fingertips brushed his palm, cool and smooth against his roughened skin. The candy disappeared into her hand. She studied it for 3 full seconds, turning it over to examine the granular surface. Then she placed it on her tongue. Her reaction was instantaneous. Her eyes flew wide at the initial tart shock, then crinkled at the corners as the sweetness followed. A small sound escaped her, something between a gasp and a sigh. She looked at Jake with new interest, the fear in her eyes replaced by surprised pleasure. Scout whined softly, pushing his head under her hand as if claiming credit. Jake felt something settle in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The candy wasn't just candy. It was a question, and she'd answered yes. Nia watched from the doorway, her datapad forgotten at her side. Her empathic senses registered the shift like a change in atmospheric pressure. The man's guarded energy, the girl's defensive fear. They'd found a frequency the Lyrian hadn't known existed. A bridge made of citrus sugar and dog hair and scarred hands. Jake remained kneeling, not pushing, not crowding. The candy dissolved between them like a treaty. Scout settled with his head in Anara's lap, content to be the living proof that sometimes trust could be earned in small, sweet moments. The girl's fingers found the dog's ears again, but now her other hand remained open on her knee. An invitation. A promise. Jake watched the careful hope in her expression and understood they'd crossed something more significant than just distance. Nia Torin watched from the doorway, her datapad forgotten in her hand. As Illyrian, protection wasn't just duty, it was the highest form of devotion. Her people measured love by how thoroughly you could shield another's heart. She observed the human soldier with the careful attention of someone who understood defense patterns. Jake Mercer moved with the economy of motion she'd seen in security personnel, but his hands gentled when touching the child or the dogs. Her empathic senses registered the complex layers around him. A fortress of military discipline wrapped around something wounded. She felt the walls he'd built, the sharp edges of memory that made him flinch at sudden noises. But beneath that, something softer, a genuine concern for the blue-skinned girl that went beyond professional obligation. When he handed Anara that candy, his emotional field shifted, protective, not predatory. She began documenting the changes in her charge. Anara's anticipation before their visits manifested in small ways. She'd position herself near the observation window 15 minutes before the dogs usually arrived. Her breathing patterns changed when she heard the specific rhythm of Jake's boots in the corridor. The girl's anxiety levels, which normally spiked at unfamiliar sounds, remained steady when the German shepherds entered the room. Jake's human pragmatism fascinated her. He approached problems like a technician: diagnose, repair, maintain. When Scout chewed through a data cable, Jake didn't scold. He just rerouted the wiring higher up the wall. When Shadow growled at a new orderly, he asked for the man's credentials rather than dismissing the dog's reaction. His solutions were physical, immediate, grounded in the tangible world. Her Lyrian sensibility operated differently. She felt energy patterns, emotional currents, the subtle vibrations of intention. Where he built barriers, she created harmonies. Yet they found common ground in the child's well-being. Their daily exchanges became a delicate dance of teasing and testing boundaries. He'd joke about protocol while she spoke of spiritual connection. They were learning each other's rhythms like musicians tuning unfamiliar instruments. "Old habits die hard," he said once when she caught him scanning exits for the third time that hour. She replied that devotion required constant vigilance. He smiled at that, a rare expression that changed his entire face. They began sharing coffee in the staff room, trading observations about Anara's progress. He taught her Terran hand signals for the dogs. She explained Lyrian calming techniques for night terrors. Anara started using the puppy's routine as her anchor point. 2 hours after morning meal, Scout would press his cold nose against her hand. After hydration break, Shadow would do her perimeter check. The girl's trust began extending beyond the animals. She'd accept nutrient packs from Jake's hands. She let Nia brush her hair without stiffening. Small surrenders that felt like victories. 3 beings from different worlds were building something fragile and necessary. The human soldier with his tactical awareness. The Lyrian caretaker with her empathic sensitivity. The silent child with her terrible knowledge. Each brought pieces the others lacked. Their connection became a living system, constantly adjusting, reinforcing itself against the outside world. What none of them realized was how soon they'd need that strength. The protection they were building around Anara would become her only shield against what was coming. The danger approached not with warning sirens but with forged paperwork and professional smiles. Their unlikely alliance represented the one variable the conspirators hadn't accounted for: the unpredictable power of cross-species connection. Shadow's head came up sharply during their afternoon visit. Her ears swiveled toward the perimeter fence that separated the orphanage garden from the maintenance corridors. The low growl in her throat wasn't the playful sound she made during tug-of-war games. This was different, tight, warning. Jake felt the change immediately. His hand went to Scout's collar, a silent command for alertness. His eyes tracked Shadow's line of sight toward the shadowy area beyond the transparent barrier. The fence's energy field hummed at a frequency most humans couldn't detect. But the dogs apparently could. For 3 seconds, nothing moved in the dimly lit corridor. Then a figure detached itself from the deeper shadows near a coolant pipe junction. Humanoid, wearing station maintenance coveralls but moving with a precision that didn't match the usual shuffle of engineering staff. The figure looked directly at Anara, who was kneeling beside Scout, patting his side, then vanished back into the maintenance way. Jake reported it to station security through his wristcom. 2 officers arrived within minutes, sidearms holstered but hands resting near them. They scanned the area with portable sensors, checked access logs, questioned the gardening bot that was trimming the hydroponic vines. Their report concluded 15 minutes later. No unauthorized access registered. No thermal signatures beyond expected parameters. Probably a maintenance worker taking a shortcut, they said. Maybe a reflection from the environmental systems. The head security officer actually smiled when he saw the German shepherds. "Animals get spooked by station noises sometimes," he told Jake. "Happens all the time." But Jake's training recognized patterns the security scans missed. The way the watcher had used the coolant pipes for cover, the precise angle that provided a clear view of the orphanage garden, while maintaining 3 separate escape routes. the timing that coincided with shift change when foot traffic would mask movement. This wasn't random. This was professional surveillance. He filed a separate report through military channels requesting additional patrols near the children's wing. The request went up the chain with priority tags that usually got attention. Meanwhile, Nia was reviewing the week's administrative updates. She nearly approved the transfer request for Inara without a second thought. The Proxima Center for Traumatized Youth had an excellent reputation. Their methods with silent patients were apparently revolutionary, but something felt wrong about the documentation. The authorization codes didn't match the standard formatting for interstellar transfers. The digital signatures looked correct at first glance, but the encryption layers were 2 generations out of date. When she cross-referenced the submitting officer's identity, she found he'd been on medical leave for 3 weeks. She brought her findings to Jake that evening over coffee in the staff lounge. He examined the documents on her datapad, his finger tracing the irregular code sequences. "This isn't bureaucracy," he said quietly. "This is someone trying to erase her from existence." His military database search turned up matches for the flawed encryption patterns. They linked to Vexarian mercenary groups known for wet work in the Vega sector. Pirates used them for discrete operations that required plausible deniability. The pieces connected with cold precision. Someone wanted the silent Lyrian girl gone, and they were using professional help to make it happen. The cheerful sounds of children playing in the next room suddenly felt fragile. The warm coffee in their cups turned cold as they realized the danger had already passed through their defenses. It had worn coveralls and moved like shadow. It had filed paperwork and used outdated codes. The attack wasn't coming with weapons first. It was coming with signatures and authorizations, and it was already inside their systems. Cooper's voice came through the comm, with that particular tightness Jake recognized from mission briefings. Not the casual tone of an old friend checking in. This was something else. "Those dogs you took," Cooper said, the words precise. "There's a reason they were scheduled for decommission." Jake watched Scout and Shadow sleeping in a tangle of limbs by his heating vent. They looked like any other young German shepherds, all oversized paws and peaceful breathing. They're enhanced, Jake, not just trained. Genetically and cybernetically modified under the Cerberus program. The program name meant nothing to him. Cooper explained it was a black-budget initiative cross-funded by military intelligence and private security firms. They'd taken canine DNA and rewritten it for specialized combat roles. These weren't failed candidates. They were the successful ones. Too successful for the official records. Scout's specialty was detection. His olfactory receptors could identify over 18,000 chemical signatures at parts per trillion concentration. He could smell adrenaline spikes, certain explosives, specific pharmaceutical compounds, and the subtle pheromones of deception. His hearing detected ultrasonic frequencies used in covert communications. That explained why he'd alert before security systems registered anything. He wasn't just noticing things, he was analyzing threat profiles. Shadow represented the other side of the program. Her muscle fibers contained synthetic microfilaments that allowed for near-silent movement regardless of surface material. Her dark coat could absorb 98% of visible light, making her practically invisible in low-light conditions. She'd been engineered for stealth insertion and perimeter defense. Her attack patterns mirrored special operations flanking maneuvers. The way she always positioned herself to cover angles, that wasn't instinct. It was programmed tactical awareness. Their bonding behavior was part of the design. The program developers found that enhanced canines performed better when emotionally attached to a handler. They'd implanted neural triggers that released oxytocin analogs during physical contact with designated persons. The dogs didn't just like Jake and Inara. Their biochemistry compelled them to protect them. Scout's immediate attachment to the girl wasn't random affection. His systems had identified her as vulnerable and registered her as a priority protection target. The knowledge settled in Jake's mind like a tactical assessment. He looked at the sleeping animals with new understanding. Their playfighting was combat practice. Their alertness was continuous threat monitoring. Their affection was a security protocol. These creatures represented millions of credits in research and development, sleeping on his floor like common pets. He realized why they'd been scheduled for destruction. The Cerberus program had been shut down after ethical violations came to light. The developers hadn't just created tools, they'd created beings with loyalty hardwired into their genetics. The military couldn't risk them falling into civilian hands. but couldn't ethically perpetuate the program either. Cooper had intercepted the termination order and redirected them to Jake, knowing he'd understand their value. The implications for Anara's situation became immediately clear. These weren't comfort animals. They were early warning systems and defensive assets. Scout could detect hostile intent before humans registered micro-expressions. Shadow could neutralize threats with surgical precision. Their presence transformed the equation from simple protection to active defense. Jake placed a hand on Scout's head. The dog opened one eye, thumped his tail twice against the floor, and went back to sleep. The gesture felt the same as always, but now Jake understood the machinery behind it. The programming. The purpose. These animals had been designed for exactly this scenario, protecting high-value targets in civilian environments. They'd gone from being his accidental companions to his most strategic advantage. The pieces settled into place with cold clarity. He wasn't just a man with 2 dogs. He was a soldier with enhanced tactical assets. Anara's parents weren't just diplomats attending interstellar conferences. They were architects designing the framework for peace across 3 contested sectors. Jake pieced together the fragments from station records and Nia's knowledge of Lyrian politics. The information formed a disturbing mosaic that explained why a child's trauma mattered to powerful interests. Their work centered on the Human Dravari Accord, a treaty that would end 70 years of hostility between species. The Dravari had been considered enemies since the border wars, their crystalline ships appearing without warning to strike trading convoys. The proposed agreement would establish joint security patrols, shared intelligence networks, and economic partnerships. It represented the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in decades. Shadow moved simultaneously, flowing like liquid darkness along the corridor's edge. She didn't attack directly. Instead, she circled behind the second mercenary and bumped his firing arm upward. The energy bolt discharged into the ceiling, showering them with sparks and melted plastic. The third mercenary shifted aim toward the dog, but Jake's warning shot rang out, the projectile whining as it glanced off a pipe beside the man's head. The sound echoed painfully in the enclosed space. In that moment of disrupted focus, Anara stepped forward. The children parted around her, their fearful faces watching as she moved toward the struggling men. Her small blue hand reached out, not in attack but accusation. The words that emerged weren't the practiced phrases of station bureaucracy. They were raw and sharp, edged with 5 months of silent witnessing. "You killed my parents," she said, her voice clear in the sudden stillness. "I saw you." Her finger pointed at the lead mercenary who had stopped struggling against Scout's weight. "Your armor had a crack on the left shoulder plate. I saw light through it when you moved." She turned to the second man.
"You whistled while you searched our shuttle."
3 notes like this. She reproduced the sequence perfectly, the tune eerie in the tense air. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just an unauthorized transfer anymore. These weren't merely hired guns following orders. They were the actual killers, the ones who had murdered her parents and tried to eliminate the witness. Her silence hadn't been just trauma. It had been preservation of evidence. The mercenaries' professional composure cracked. Their weapons wavered as they realized the child could identify them specifically, not just generally. The bureaucratic pretense vanished, replaced by the cold reality of personal culpability. The interstellar conspiracy suddenly had faces, and a small blue-skinned girl was pointing at them in a dim service tunnel. Anara's accusation hung in the damp air of the service corridor, a truth so sharp it seemed to cut the oxygen supply. The mercenaries' professional masks slipped completely. Their weapons wavered as they realized this wasn't about retrieving a witness anymore. This was about being identified as specific individuals who had committed specific murders. The child's silence hadn't been emptiness, it had been preservation. She had witnessed everything that day on the shuttle. The way the attacking ship had matched their velocity perfectly. The specific sound of the boarding clamps engaging. The crack in the lead mercenary's shoulder plate where the armor had been repaired poorly. The 3-note whistle the second man kept humming. These weren't general observations. They were courtroom-quality identifications that could put these men before interstellar tribunals. The political implications unfolded in Jake's mind with military precision. These weren't just hired guns following orders. They were the actual perpetrators, the ones who had executed Lyrian diplomats mid-flight. Their presence here now confirmed the assassination was politically motivated, not some random act of space piracy. Anara's testimony could prove that opponents of the human Dravari Treaty had resorted to murder to maintain the status quo. The treaty threatened entire criminal economies built on interstellar conflict. Pirate networks that supplied weapons to both sides, that ran blockades in contested sectors, that profited from the endless tension between species. They stood to lose everything if peace broke out. The assassination of key diplomats was an investment in continued warfare, an investment that required eliminating the one witness who could prove it was murder, not accident. Anara became more than a traumatized child in that moment. She became the living evidence that could validate the treaty's necessity. Her safety directly impacted whether billions of citizens across 3 sectors would continue living under the threat of conflict or enjoy the benefits of peace. The weight of that responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders like physical armor. This wasn't just about protecting one little girl anymore. He looked at the mercenaries with new understanding. Their determination wasn't just professional, it was personal survival. If Anara lived to testify, they faced lifetime imprisonment or execution. That explained the extreme measures, the forged documents, the willingness to operate in a civilian station. They weren't just completing a contract, they were fighting for their own freedom. The mission parameters shifted instantly in Jake's assessment. They were no longer conducting a rescue operation. They were protecting critical evidence in what amounted to an interstellar conspiracy case. Every moment they kept Anara safe, undermined the forces that profited from endless conflict. Every step toward the embassy strengthened the possibility of galactic peace. He made eye contact with Nia across the corridor. The Lyrian caretaker's empathic senses would be registering the seismic shift in stakes. Her people had been advocating for this treaty for decades. Now she understood that the child in her care held the key to its ratification. The personal had become political in the most profound way possible. Jake's grip tightened on his weapon. The confined space that moments before had felt like a trap now felt like a defensive position. They had the advantage of knowing exactly what they were fighting for, while the mercenaries were suddenly fighting to avoid consequences. The psychological balance had shifted along with the strategic one. Scout maintained his pin on the lead mercenary, but his growl had changed tone. It wasn't just warning anymore, it was anticipation. The enhanced dog seemed to understand they'd moved into a new phase of engagement. Shadow's position at the rear became more aggressive. Her body coiled for immediate action. The dogs recognized the change in energy, even if they couldn't comprehend the political ramifications. The emergency lights continued to flicker overhead, casting jumping shadows that made the standoff feel like something from a combat simulation. But the stakes were terrifyingly real. Jake calculated their options with cold clarity. They needed to neutralize these men without killing them. Living prisoners could corroborate Anara's testimony. They could name names, follow money trails, expose the entire conspiracy. The mission was no longer about reaching safety. It was about securing justice. The shift was immediate. Jake's body reverted to a language his muscles never forgot. Violence became syntax. He moved without conscious thought. Years of combat training overriding civilian hesitation. Scout maintained his hold on the lead mercenary, teeth locked on the man's armor plating. Shadow disrupted the others with calculated lunges that forced them off balance without engaging directly. The narrow corridor became an advantage, limiting how many attackers could approach at once. Jake's hand closed around Anara's arm, pulling her behind him in one smooth motion. Nia shepherded the other children forward, her voice low and steady as she kept them moving. They abandoned the planned route immediately, taking the first left into an unmarked maintenance shaft. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and lubricants. Emergency lighting cast long shadows that twisted with every movement. Scout released his grip and surged ahead, his nose working the air as he chose their path. He led them through accessways marked with technical symbols only engineers would recognize. Narrow ladders descended into utility spaces where condensation dripped from overhead pipes. The children moved silently, their bright shirts like strange flowers in the industrial gloom. Their breathing came in sharp little gasps that echoed off the metal walls. Shadow brought up the rear, her dark form melting into the shadows whenever they paused. Her growl was a constant low warning in the darkness, answering the sounds of pursuit that echoed through the tunnel system. Twice she doubled back briefly, and the sounds of stumbling and curses followed. She never engaged fully, just created enough confusion to slow them down. Jake utilized every tactical retreat principle he'd ever learned. He knocked over maintenance carts to block passages behind them. He triggered emergency hatch locks that would take time to override. His mind calculated their lead constantly. 30 seconds, then 45, then a full minute. He prioritized speed over stealth once they were discovered. The goal was distance now, not concealment. Nia's empathic senses became their early warning system. She'd pause suddenly, her hand going to her temple, and redirect them away from certain intersections. "Not that way," she'd whisper, her violet eyes seeing threats the rest of them couldn't detect. She felt the aggressive intentions ahead like pressure changes in the atmosphere. Her guidance kept them from walking into prepared ambushes. They encountered a security checkpoint that shouldn't have been active. Two figures in station security uniforms stood blocking the passage to the embassy sector. Jake was raising his weapon when Nia caught his arm. "They're not real security," she murmured. "Their emotional signatures are all wrong." Scout confirmed it with a low growl, his body tense. They retreated into a ventilation maintenance shaft, crawling through cramped darkness filled with the hum of atmospheric processors. The embassy grounds appeared suddenly through a service hatch. Bright lights and clean corridors replaced the industrial gloom. Two Marine guards snapped to attention as they emerged, weapons rising as they assessed the bloodied, panting group. Jake kept his hands visible, herding the children forward while the dogs maintained protective positions. They were a ragged procession. Jake's knuckles were split from where he'd punched a control panel to short-circuit a door mechanism. Nia had a bleeding cut on her cheek from flying debris. The children's bright shirts were smudged with grease and something darker. But they were all there, all moving, all breathing. Scout and Shadow stood alert at the perimeter, their bodies still thrumming with operational tension. Their eyes scanned the new environment with professional assessment. The Marine guards watched the dogs with respectful caution, recognizing trained behavior when they saw it. The group stood there for a moment in the bright light, breathing the clean, filtered air of the embassy sector. The children clustered around Nia, their small hands holding onto her uniform. Anara pressed against Jake's side, her blue fingers curled in his jacket. The dogs completed the circle, their vigilant presence a living barrier. They had survived their first combat test as a unit. Soldier, caretaker, children, and enhanced canines. Their unconventional family had held together under fire, and the bond they'd forged in peace had proven strong enough for war. Ambassador Willis's office felt like a different world from the service tunnels. Clean lines, soft lighting, the smell of polished wood and fresh coffee. His eyes went immediately to Anara, taking in her blue skin and the way she held onto Jake's jacket. He didn't need introductions. "The Lyrian child," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We've been expecting this situation." Marine guards sealed the doors behind them, their weapons held at ready positions. The embassy's security systems hummed to life around them, layers of protection engaging one after another. Willis confirmed everything. The Human-Dravari Treaty wasn't just another diplomatic agreement. It represented the first real chance for peace in 3 contested sectors. Joint patrols would cover the Vega, Proxima, and Sirius regions, areas where pirate networks had operated with impunity for decades. These criminal organizations moved illegal weapons, ran blockades, and profited from the ongoing tension between species. The treaty threatened to collapse their entire economy of conflict. Anara's testimony changed everything. Her ability to identify the actual killers transformed the political calculus. She could prove the opposition had resorted to assassination, making ratification not just desirable but necessary. Willis offered Terran-level protection immediately, the highest diplomatic security classification. It meant armed guards, secure quarters, and non-stop monitoring. But it was temporary, a waiting game until they could find a permanent solution. The discussion turned to what came next. Willis laid out options with clinical precision. Witness protection programs on remote colonies, security details for life, hidden identities in controlled environments. Each option felt like another form of imprisonment. Jake looked at Anara standing between Scout and Shadow. The girl had spent months in silent fear. More hiding seemed like punishment, not protection. Nia spoke first, her Lyrian accent softening the military precision of the conversation. She described how Anara had responded to their unconventional family structure, how the dogs provided security no armed guard could match, how the combination of human pragmatism and Lyrian empathy had created something stronger than any single species approach. Jake added his assessment. The enhanced dogs represented a mobile security system that could adapt to any environment. His own military experience complemented Nia's empathic abilities. Together, they could provide protection that was both tactical and emotional. The solution wasn't to hide Anara away. It was to create a permanent protective unit around her. They proposed formal adoption, a multi-species family recognized under both Terran and Lyrian law. Jake would provide the security expertise and military connections. Nia would offer cultural continuity and emotional support. The dogs would handle immediate threat response. Anara would grow up understanding both her Lyrian heritage and human values, protected by the best of both worlds. Willis considered the proposal with a diplomat's careful assessment. He saw the practical advantages, a mobile, adaptable security solution that couldn't be compromised through bureaucratic channels. The emotional benefits were equally important. Anara needed stability, not just safety. She needed a family, not just guards. The embassy became their transitional space. Secure quarters were arranged with separate areas for the children and the dogs. Marine guards worked with Jake to establish security protocols that integrated the animals' capabilities. Nia began the paperwork for cross-species adoption, navigating the complex legal requirements between their governments. They settled into a temporary rhythm within the embassy's protected walls. The children adapted to the new routine with surprising resilience. Scout and Shadow learned the security patrol patterns, their enhanced senses complementing the electronic systems. Anara began speaking more, her words still careful but increasingly confident. The embassy's protection gave them breathing room to plan their future. No more running through service tunnels. No more looking over their shoulders in crowded corridors. They had time to consider options to build something lasting. The sterile elegance of diplomatic quarters felt alien after the orphanage's warm colors and the station's industrial spaces, but it represented safety. A foundation they could build upon. Their unconventional family had found temporary shelter, but already they were planning for something more permanent. The embassy was a stepping stone, not a destination, a secure base from which to launch their new life together. The walls around them were strong, but the bonds they were building felt stronger still. Nia stood with Jake in the embassy gardens, the artificial sunlight warming their faces. She explained the Lyrian concept slowly, choosing words that would cross the species barrier. Kethvari meant soul-forged, a bond created not through blood or ceremony but through shared survival. It described connections that formed under extreme circumstances, when beings chose each other against impossible odds. The concept transcended species, background, or origin. It recognized that some bonds became stronger than genetics or tradition. In Lyrian culture, couples who endured life-and-death situations together were considered bonded at the deepest level. Their connection was viewed as tempered by experience, made unbreakable through shared trials. This framework gave legitimacy to what they'd built: a human soldier, a Lyrian caretaker, a traumatized child, and 2 enhanced dogs. Their family structure defied conventional categories, but it worked. It protected. It healed. Anara approached them while they talked, Scout moving at her side like a shadow. Her small blue hand touched Jake's arm, then Nia's. She looked from one to the other, her violet eyes clear for the first time since they'd met her. "Mother said family isn't who you're born to," she whispered. "It's who you're safe with." The words hung between them, simple and profound. Her mother's wisdom, delivered through the child's rediscovered voice, sealed their fate more completely than any legal document could. The puppies completed the unit in ways that went beyond their training. Scout's enhanced detection abilities provided constant environmental monitoring that no security system could match. He could smell elevated stress hormones before humans registered anxiety. He detected chemical traces from 50 meters away. Shadow's stealth capabilities created a mobile perimeter that adapted to any situation. Their protective instincts were hardwired into their genetics, making them ideal guardians for a child who would always need extra security. Together, they represented a new model of family, cross-species, trauma-informed, and resilient. They'd been forged in crisis and tempered by shared danger. Their bond acknowledged the reality of Anara's trauma while building structures to help her heal. They incorporated military precision with empathic understanding, creating something stronger than either approach alone. Ambassador Willis helped them navigate the legal recognition process. Terran law had provisions for non-traditional family units, especially those formed during diplomatic crises. Lyrian law recognized Kethvari bonds as legally binding when verified by empathic assessment. The paperwork became a formality. The real validation had already happened in service tunnels and embassy gardens. Their adoption certificate listed 5 members, 2 human, 1 Lyrian, 2 canine. The designation acknowledged the dogs as full family members with legal protection status. They became emblematic of the peace they were helping to build. Their very existence demonstrated that species could work together, protect each other, and form bonds that transcended biological differences. The same treaty that had cost Anara her original family had given her a new one. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, but it felt less like tragedy and more like redemption. The soul-forged bond gave them a framework to understand what they'd become. It wasn't just about legal status or practical arrangements. It was about the way Jake knew when Nia needed space without her speaking, the way Anara could calm Shadow with a touch when the dog's training made her too alert, the way they all moved together through spaces, each watching different angles, each protecting the others. They'd been forged in crisis, but they were building their peace one day at a time. Their unusual family becoming living proof that different worlds could find common ground. The embassy's protective embrace gave them temporary shelter, but demanded decisions about what came next. Their unusual family unit represented something the new treaty needed, living proof that different species could work together effectively. Ambassador Willis presented options with careful neutrality, laying out possibilities like cards on a table. Remote colonies offered anonymity but isolation. Protective custody provided security but separation. Standard adoption meant normalcy but vulnerability. None felt right for what they'd become. Jake's military experience mapped perfectly onto the treaty's security needs. His understanding of threat assessment, tactical movement, and defensive protocols aligned with the joint force requirements. Nia's empathic abilities offered something no training could provide: the capacity to read emotional currents in mixed species environments, to detect deception through means scanners couldn't register. Together they created a unique skill set that matched the treaty's unprecedented nature. The puppy's capabilities completed the equation. Scout's enhanced detection skills could identify chemical threats, stress markers, and concealed weapons across species lines. Shadow's stealth training allowed for discreet protection in crowded diplomatic settings. Their bonding with Anara made them personally invested in her safety in ways no hired security could match. The Joint Defense Initiative needed assets that could operate in both human and Lyrian environments without causing diplomatic incidents. They considered roles in the new mixed security force protecting treaty implementations. The positions would involve escorting diplomatic missions, securing negotiation sites, and providing protection for key personnel. The work would keep them together as a unit while serving the peace that had given them purpose. They'd travel between worlds, living on ships and stations, always moving but always together. The instability that might trouble other families felt familiar to them. They'd been formed in motion, forged in transition. Anara's needs guided every discussion. She required stability but not stagnation, protection but not imprisonment. Her Lyrian heritage mattered as much as her safety. They designed their future around dual citizenship, ensuring she'd spend time on both Terran and Lyrian worlds. Her education would include human history and Lyrian philosophy, standard language, and empathic training. She'd understand conflict from both perspectives, making her the ideal bridge between cultures. The decision crystallized during a strategy session in the embassy's situation room. Maps of contested sectors glowed on displays, showing where joint patrols would operate. Jake pointed to choke points where pirate activity remained high. Nia identified cultural flashpoints that required sensitive handling. The puppies watched the displays with alert interest, their training making them recognize tactical patterns. Anara sat between them, her small hands resting on both dogs, her eyes taking in the complex web of connections. They chose the Joint Defense Initiative together. The work would place them at the forefront of the peace they'd helped secure. Their unique combination of skills, military, empathic, enhanced canine, created a protective capability that didn't exist elsewhere. They'd operate as a mobile unit, answering directly to the Treaty Oversight Committee rather than any single government. Their loyalty would be to the peace itself, not to flags or borders. The paperwork felt different this time. Not applications or requests, but commitments. Signatures on documents that would shape their lives for years to come. Jake's hand was steady, his military precision evident in the crisp letters. Nia's flowing Lyrian script curved beside it. Even Anara signed her name carefully, her letters still uneven but determined. They were choosing their future rather than having it chosen for them. Their personal healing aligned with the larger peace-building effort. Each mission would reinforce the bonds between them, while demonstrating cross-species cooperation to others. They'd become ambassadors in their own right, showing through action what could be achieved when different beings worked together. The trauma that had brought them together would become the foundation for something stronger, a family serving peace, protecting hope and proving that sometimes the best security comes from connection, not isolation. Scout and Shadow adapted to their new roles with the seamless precision of their training. The enhanced German shepherds moved through embassy corridors and family quarters with equal awareness, their programming now serving a permanent protective detail rather than temporary missions. They maintained constant vigilance without losing their capacity for domestic connection, a balance few security systems could achieve. Scout remained primarily with Anara, his detection specialties tuned to her specific needs. His olfactory receptors could identify chemical changes in her stress levels before visible signs emerged. He detected elevated cortisol through classroom air, subtle pheromone shifts during nightmares, the specific scent signature of her fear response. His proximity provided a living, early warning system that no technology could replicate. When she studied, he lay at her feet, his nose testing the air for threats she couldn't perceive. When she slept, he positioned himself between her and the door, his ears rotating through surveillance patterns. Shadow partnered with Jake during security preparations, her stealth capabilities enhancing their tactical planning. She could move through embassy gardens without disturbing vegetation, test perimeter sensors without triggering alarms, and identify blind spots in camera coverage. Her dark coat absorbed light in ways that made her nearly invisible during night checks. She complemented his military experience with biological advantages no human could match. Their joint patrols became studies in efficient protection, human intuition combined with canine senses. The dogs' training made them ideal for a high-profile multi-species family. They recognized diplomatic personnel by scent and demeanor, differentiating between authorized visitors and potential threats. They adapted to varying gravity environments, adjusting their movement patterns for different spacecraft and orbital stations. Their protective behaviors extended to Nia and the other children, creating a mobile security perimeter that traveled with the family wherever they went. Beyond security, they provided emotional stability through consistent routine. Morning walks became intelligence-gathering missions that also burned excess energy. Feeding times reinforced their bonding through shared rituals. Even their play sessions served dual purposes, maintaining physical fitness while practicing controlled aggression. The children learned to read the dog's body language as naturally as interpreting facial expressions. A certain tail position meant all clear. A particular ear angle signaled potential concern. The animals became living symbols of military assets transformed into peacekeeping tools. Their enhanced capabilities, originally designed for combat, now serve diplomatic protection and family stability. Visitors to embassy functions often remarked on the elegant efficiency of their presence, how they moved through crowds without disruption while maintaining perfect awareness. They demonstrated that engineered creatures could choose purposes beyond their programming. Their journey from euthanasia candidates to essential protectors reached completion in these daily routines. The same genetic modifications that made them dangerous in wartime made them invaluable in peace. They'd been saved from destruction to become saviors themselves, their enhanced senses and training now dedicated to preventing the kinds of conflicts they were designed to fight. The dogs proved that loyalty could transcend programming. Their connection to the family wasn't just biochemical conditioning, it was choice reinforced by experience. They responded to Anara's whispered fears with more urgency than to coded commands. They prioritized Jake's hand signals over programmed protocols. Their protection came from understanding, not just obedience. In quiet moments, when security checks were complete and the family relaxed together, the dogs would shed their operational alertness. Scout would rest his head on Anara's lap, his breathing slowing to match hers. Shadow would lean against Jake's leg, her watchful eyes finally closing. These moments of peace represented their ultimate success. Creatures designed for violence choosing calm, engineered protectors finding home in the gentle spaces between crises. Their story completed the circle from military tools to family guardians, proving that even the most specialized weapons could be reforged into something kinder. The embassy quarters settled around them like a second skin, the day's tension bleeding away into the quiet hum of life support. They arranged themselves on the sleeping platform with the unspoken coordination of people who've learned to share space under pressure. Jake took the side nearest the door, his body angled toward the entrance even in repose. Nia positioned herself on the opposite side, her Lyrian senses tuned to the emotional currents in the room. Between them, Inara lay curled on her side, one small blue hand resting on Scout's flank where he lay pressed against the platform's edge. Her breathing had finally evened out into the deep rhythm of untroubled sleep, the pale light from the status panel softening the sharp angles of her face. Shadow maintained her watch from the room's darkest corner, her body angled to cover both the main entrance and service hatch. Her ears rotated in slow, constant motion, tracking the sounds beyond the bulkhead. The footsteps of Marine guards on patrol, the distant thrum of elevator systems, the whisper of ventilation currents moving through ductwork. Her enhanced hearing could isolate and identify each sound, categorizing them into threat levels without conscious effort. Scout mirrored her vigilance even in sleep, his nose twitching at chemical traces in the air supply, his dreams undoubtedly filled with the scent memory of potential dangers. Jake and Nia lay awake in the dimness, their whispered words barely disturbing the quiet. They spoke of practical things, security rotations, training schedules, educational requirements for the children. But beneath the surface, logistics flowed deeper currents. The future they'd chosen together felt both inevitable and impossible. A human soldier who'd expected to die alone in some conflict zone, a Lyrian caretaker who'd dedicated her life to others without building her own family. They'd found each other through tragedy and built something stronger from the wreckage. His calloused hand found hers over Inara's sleeping form. The contrast told their story, rough Terran skin against smooth Lyrian, scarred knuckles against elegant fingers. Their touch crossed species barriers that had once seemed impassable. She laced her fingers through his, her empathic senses registering the steady determination beneath his military demeanor. He felt the protective warmth of her concern for the child between them. The station's constant vibration traveled through the sleeping platform, a reminder of the artificial world that had nearly broken them. The same environment that had witnessed Inara's withdrawal now sheltered her recovery. The universe had tried to fracture them with violence and loss, but they'd chosen connection instead. Their bond had been tested in service corridors and diplomatic chambers, and each trial had only strengthened it. They'd created something that defied conventional categories. Not just a family, but a protective unit. Not just loved ones, but allies. The dogs completed the circle with their enhanced capabilities, their loyalty transcending programming. Together they formed a living shield around the child who'd brought them together, their strengths compensating for each other's limitations. Home became the specific configuration of breathing patterns in the dark, the weight of Inara's trust between them, the watchful presence of the dogs at the perimeter, the shared purpose that made waking up tomorrow meaningful. They'd traded solitary existences for this complicated, beautiful entanglement of species and skills and affection. The vow hung unspoken in the air, to protect this, to preserve this, to choose each other every morning they were given. The embassy's security systems provided external protection, but the real safety lived in this room, in this bond they'd forged themselves. They drifted toward sleep, knowing they'd built something stronger than any force that might try to break them. Their unusual family finally at rest, but always watching over each other. Their story reminds us that healing finds us through connection, not isolation. That courage often means choosing family when the universe offers only loss. A retired soldier carrying ghosts, a silent alien child, a Lyrian caretaker, two enhanced dogs, each marked by difference, yet stronger together. They proved that what makes us vulnerable can become our greatest strength. Sometimes the universe delivers exactly what we need before we know to ask. Their bond, forged in crisis, became their compass. Wherever their mission takes them, they travel as one, soul-forged, protected, and finally home.